The compact cassette was introduced by Philips in 1963 at the Berlin Radio Show as a small, user-friendly tape cartridge intended mainly for dictation and portable recording. Philips freely licensed the format, under pressure from Sony, which helped it quickly become the world standard for audio tapes. Early cassette recorders were cheap and convenient, but sound quality was low. The format was even marketed as a toy at first, since users were essentially trading fidelity for portability and cost savings. By the mid-1960s, Philips had released a stereo cassette design, and pre-recorded musicassette albums came to market. Mercury Records USA launched them in 1966. However, these early music cassettes sold poorly because vinyl still offered superior audio and often lower cost. In the late 1960s, the cassette's main advantage was convenience for home recording. Sound quality was not yet high enough to rival dedicated music formats. During this time, the 8-track tape, introduced 1965 for car stereos, briefly dominated the pre-recorded tape market as it provided better fidelity for automobiles. Despite its lo-fi beginnings, the groundwork was laid for the cassette's improvement. By 1968, over 85 manufacturers were selling cassette players, and millions of units were in use. The stage was set for engineers to tackle the cassette's technical limitations in order to make it a true hi-fi medium. A major breakthrough was on the horizon. New tape formulations and noise reduction technology would arrive by the end of the decade to dramatically enhance the tiny cassette's performance. The early 1970s marked the transformation of the cassette from a convenience format into a legitimate high-fidelity contender. A key turning point came in 1971, when the Advent Corporation introduced its Model 201 cassette deck, the first deck to combine Dolby B noise reduction with chromium dioxide Type 2 high-bias tape. Dolby B, originally developed in 1968 for home tape units, was a noise reduction system that significantly tamed the cassette's notorious hiss by about 9 to 10 decibels in the treble range. This development catapulted the cassette forward, allowing recordings that rivaled vinyl in fidelity under the right conditions. Likewise, the new chrome tapes introduced by BASF around 1970 offered much better high-frequency response than the old ferric tapes. The Advent 201, with its Dolby B and chrome tape, proved that cassettes could deliver serious audio quality. It started the era of high-fidelity cassettes and players. Engineers rapidly built on these advances. Manufacturers improved cassette mechanisms with better tape heads, capstan motors, and tape transport stability. Notably, 3-head decks, with separate heads for recording, playback, and erase, were introduced by Nakamichi, Sony, and others in 1973, allowing direct monitoring of recordings and superior calibration. By the mid-1970s, continued innovation had elevated the compact cassette's sound quality close to that of vinyl. Cassette decks could now reproduce a much wider frequency range with less noise and distortion than earlier models. The format's convenience began to outweigh its remaining drawbacks, leading to the decline of the bulkier 8-track cartridge. As soon as car stereo makers improved in-car cassette players in the mid-70s, consumers swiftly abandoned 8 tracks in favor of the smaller, more versatile cassettes. Several tape formulation upgrades rolled out in this decade. Type 2 high-bias tapes, using chromium dioxide or similar cobalt-doped ferric oxide formulations, became widely available and were supported by most new decks. There was also an experimental Type 3, ferrochrome, dual-layer tape introduced in the mid-70s, which layered ferric oxide and chrome dioxide to improve performance. While Type 3 tapes offered some improvement, strong low-frequency output combined with extended highs, they never gained much popularity and were soon made obsolete by the next innovation, pure metal tape. Toward the end of the decade, in 1979, 3M introduced the first Type 4 metal tape, trademarked Metafine, consisting of pure metal particles rather than metal oxides. Metal tapes had higher coercivity and could be biased for even greater high-frequency headroom and lower noise. Although early metal tapes were expensive and put more wear on heads, they represented the apex of analog tape formulation, with a promise of superior frequency response and greater dynamic range than previous tape types. By 1980, the cassette had fully shed its dictation-only image. The cumulative improvements of the 1970s, better tape, better decks, and noise reduction, made it entirely feasible to include a cassette deck in hi-fi home systems without apology. The 1980s can be considered the golden era of the compact cassette, both in technical refinement and widespread popularity. On the technical side, noise reduction saw further advances. Dolby C, introduced around 1980, built upon Dolby B by combining two noise reduction bands to roughly double the hiss reduction. High-end decks in the early 80s began to include Dolby C, which significantly lowered noise floor and expanded dynamic range, albeit with some compatibility issues if tapes were played back on non-Dolby C machines. For the most demanding listeners, some manufacturers also offered DBX noise reduction on select decks. The DBX system, a full-spectrum companding noise reduction, could deliver on the order of 30 decibels of noise reduction, effectively eliminating hiss, but it never became widespread for pre-recorded music due to playback incompatibility. Still, in controlled home recording settings, DBX-equipped decks achieved excellent results. Cassette hardware continued to improve throughout the 80s. Decks with dual capstan mechanisms, direct drive motors, quartz PLL speed control, and amorphous or sendust alloy heads became common in mid to high-range models, all aimed at reducing wow and flutter and extending frequency response. Many decks adopted Dolby HX Pro, introduced by Bang & Olufsen and Dolby in 1982, a clever headroom extension circuit that dynamically adjusted record bias during high treble passages. HX Pro did not require decoding on playback and allowed recordings with brighter high-frequency response and lower distortion on any deck. By optimizing bias in real time, HX Pro maximized what could be recorded on tape, especially when using the new premium tape formulations, high bias and metal. Tape formulations also reached their peak in this era. Metal, Type 4, tapes, though introduced in 1979, only started gaining traction among audiophiles by the mid-1980s as deck manufacturers perfected the electronics to take advantage of them. These tapes offered the highest output levels and widest frequency response of any analog tape, treble response well beyond 20 kHz and maximum output level high enough to rival studio reel-to-reel, especially with noise reduction engaged. Metal tapes were costly and comprised a small segment of sales, but they represented state-of-the-art performance. Meanwhile, Chrome, Type 2, tapes had become the everyday high-quality choice for most consumers, as virtually all new pre-recorded cassettes and blank tapes sold were high-bias by the late 80s. Even budget Type 1 ferric tapes improved in formulation, often using cobalt doping to extend high-frequency output, ensuring that decent performance was possible at all price levels. While audio quality was reaching new heights, the cassette was also conquering the mass market. Sony's Walkman, introduced in 1979, exploded in popularity in the early 1980s and turned the cassette into a ubiquitous portable music medium. Suddenly music could be carried anywhere in a pocket-sized player, something vinyl records could never offer. Cassette boomboxes and car stereos also proliferated, meaning people could enjoy and record music virtually anywhere. As a result, cassette sales skyrocketed. By 1985, cassettes overtook LPs as the most popular format for purchase music in many major markets. The phrase home taping entered the lexicon, reflecting how common it was to make personalized mixtapes or copy albums to cassette for personal use. Blank tape sales were enormous, and virtually every new album was released on pre-recorded cassette, often in addition to vinyl and later CD. The cassette had truly become the dominant audio format of the 1980s. By the end of the decade, a top-of-the-line cassette deck, from brands like Nakamichi, TIAC, Pioneer, Sony, Tandberg, paired with premium metal tape and Dolby noise reduction, could deliver 20 Hz 20 kHz frequency response and a dynamic range upwards of 70 decibels, performance approaching that of the emerging digital formats. The cassette had come a long way from its humble origins. Ironically, just as the format reached this technical pinnacle, the first signs of decline appeared on the horizon in the form of the compact disc. But the cassette was not finished yet. One more wave of innovation would arrive as the format entered its final chapter in the 1990s. In the early 1990s, analog cassette technology made its last great leap in an effort to compete with the rising tide of digital audio. Dolby Laboratories rolled out Dolby S in 1989, an advanced noise reduction system derived from professional Dolby SR, designed specifically to push cassette fidelity even closer to digital. Dolby S provided about 10 decibels noise reduction at low frequencies and up to 24 decibels at high frequencies, dramatically reducing hiss and improving headroom. In fact, Dolby claimed that on a high-quality deck with top-grade tape, Dolby S could make analog cassette sound subjectively equivalent to digital media under normal listening conditions. This was a bold assertion, but Dolby S decks indeed achieved impressively low noise and distortion. By the early 90s, a number of upscale cassette decks from Sony, Pioneer, Harman Kardon, and others came equipped with Dolby S, while maintaining backwards compatibility with B and C. Unfortunately, Dolby S arrived just as consumers were pivoting to CD, so it remained a feature for the enthusiast minority. At the same time, manufacturers introduced what can be considered the ultimate blank cassettes, the final generation of premium tapes that represented the pinnacle of cassette tape formulation and construction. For example, Sony's Super Metal Master tape, released in the mid-1990s, was a Type 4 metal tape housed in a precision ceramic composite shell for maximum stability. Its design minimized vibration and offered extremely smooth tape travel, further reducing modulation noise. Likewise, TDK's high-end offerings like the MAXG, late 1980s into 1990s, used a heavy metal alloy frame inside the cassette shell to reduce resonances, and Maxell's Vertex and that's MRX tapes pushed the performance envelope with refined metal particle formulas and rugged housings. These exotic tapes were expensive and produced in limited quantities, but they delivered unparalleled audio performance for analog tape, capable of handling very high signal levels with minimal noise and excellent frequency response. In short, they were the culmination of 3 decades of tape development. Enthusiasts using such tapes in a well-calibrated 1990s Dolby S deck could achieve truly stunning results from the humble cassette, a fidelity that would have seemed impossible in 1963. Yet, for all these technical triumphs, the writing was on the wall for the compact cassette. The compact disc, CD, introduced in the early 1980s, had by the 1990s become inexpensive and wildly popular, offering perfect sound with none of the tape format's hassles. By 1992, CD overtook cassettes as the top format in places like the US and UK. Cassette sales began a steep decline. By the late 1990s, the cassette format was clearly in its twilight. Production of high-end tapes and decks tapered off. Pre-recorded music cassettes had largely disappeared from retail by the early 2000s. The evolution of the compact cassette had effectively come to an end. The compact cassette underwent a remarkable 4-decade journey, from a low-fidelity dictation gadget in the 1960s to a hi-fi music powerhouse by the 1980s, before gracefully fading away in the digital age. The story of the compact cassette is an evolution of continuous improvement, ultimately capped by some of the most sophisticated analog audio technology ever developed at the format sunset. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also support the channel in any way you like. Until the next video.